Welcome, everyone. It's good to see all your faces. Can you hear me all right? Great. So my name is Tamar Salibian. I'm so excited for today, and I'm really grateful to the Freedom Series and the individuals involved in this group, just to have a conversation that's, of course, related to the Free Britney movement, but also contextualizes it maybe in certain ways, yeah? So I'll just share my screen and get started. And this will be a somewhat interactive session using the chat primarily. And then at the end, we'll have a time to have a conversation, discussion. You'll be able to speak freely when we get to the end of it. So here we go. So welcome once again. One second. What I'd like to do is begin with an entering reflection. If you have a piece of paper, or maybe if you want to use your computer, take a moment to just rest, relax, get yourself centered, and then think of a time when you saw or read something in the news or in media, and you thought to yourself, well, wait, that's not true. And what I'd like to do is to have you silently to yourselves take some notes. When was that? What was it about? What did it make you think about? And then maybe, what did you think about it a day later or in a week? Or how do you feel about it right now? I'll give you 2 minutes. Take your time, think about it. And just maybe 30 more seconds, a few more thoughts that come to you. All right. So after this moment of reflection, sometimes we do this in different settings to maybe center, get a little bit of focus when we enter this space. We'll come back to this little reflection that we did. What I'd like to do first, though, is give you an introduction of who I am, where I'm coming from, my background. I'm relatively new to the Free Britney movement, maybe 4 or 5 months, but I've been a fan since my 20s of Miss Britney Jean Spears. But of course, I was also affected by the ways that the industry and some of its players shaped her narrative to the public. My education and professional background is I went to art school, studied photography, and then I ended up working in publishing and photo sales in New York City in the late 90s. So this was pre-Britney's immense rise to fame, but also post, for example, the death of Princess Diana. So that, just to give you a reference of where and when I was starting to think about the things that we're going to maybe talk about today. So by age 22, I was already aware of the way that media constructs narratives to drive profit. I worked for a photo agency, and I've shared some of this on Twitter. We were tasked with putting together dossiers of imagery to fit a certain narrative or a number of different narratives. For example, after Princess Diana's death, there was a whole dossier on her romantic relationships. There was a whole dossier on young Prince Harry and young Prince William. There were all of these different stories that were being shaped using imagery and using different narrative. So at that time, I started to understand how this works to uphold and reproduce power and, of course, profit, because the companies we're working for, they were magazine publishers and they were news and entertainment outlets, yeah? And so after that, I decided to go to film school. And then, so I went to CalArts, moved to Los Angeles, and I ended up afterwards working in reality TV post-production. I worked on such shows as Survivor and I Love New York, as well as The Apprentice, but nope, I never met him. but I watched hundreds of hours of boardroom footage. And that's where I also started to think about this question of narrative, because in film school, I had learned about editing. So I was piecing together this understanding of the power of narrative and the different ways it can be used to create a story, to convince a public, to drive or even destroy a brand. And it was my experience in reality TV post-production that compelled me to pursue a PhD in media studies. Of course, what I didn't understand at the time was the benefit of my experience in production, knowing some of the pieces of the entertainment industry from the inside, and then that curiosity to understand it from a scholarly perspective, looking at it during my studies. What I ended up doing was, for this PhD in media studies and the cultural studies program at Claremont Graduate University, I ended up writing this 200+ page dissertation on the MTV series Teen Mom OG. If you know about that show, a couple of seasons within the whole series, the crew is included inside the show alongside the cast, almost like co-stars. And what fascinated me was the way that the cast and the crew coexisted, and that promoted certain ideologies about labor, surveillance, and like getting rid of any private space away from the camera. So my starting point was to think about social media use as well, not as a recreational activity, but as labor. I'll piece these two pieces together in a second. Then I started looking at certain theory, Marxist theory, in which the idea of the worker is never their true self when they're at work, perhaps. I'll abbreviate this so that we can get, save a little time. But the idea is that when we're at work, we are sort of pulled away from our true selves. And then I started thinking about social media and different ways that, branding ourselves takes us away from our true selves. And so then I started thinking about how do TV shows or how does news media or social media influencers promote that as a positive thing? And so in that regard, I started to look at the shows such as Teen Mom OG, in which you see, like, for example, Tyler and Caitlin really happy about being on TV, really happy about having this interaction with the crew, and how that promotes these questions of increasingly publicizing our private lives. So the question that came up was the question of ideology. For me, in my research, was a question of labor, surveillance, consumerism, and how they're presented in pleasant ways or palatable ways to make the audience enjoy that and then maybe adopt those practices as their own. But of course, I also started to think about how this benefits power, corporations, entities, social media platforms, etc. So there's this question of power and profit and capital, and then as well as how the audience or the consumer is related to that. I'll just pause for a second and say, this kind of stuff that I'm looking at connects to media literacy, increasingly being aware and literate and understanding the processes that are at play. And I will add that the Free Britney movement is already super engaged in media literacy and really understanding and questioning the things that are at work, the things that are presented by media, the things that sort of take over Twitter for a day, let's say. I'm thinking of yesterday, right? So there was stuff that happened on Twitter that everyone was kind of wondering about. So I'm not here to say that I'm any sort of expert. I'm just saying that my context is to sort of shed light on things that are already happening in the Free Britney movement and in a number of activism and social justice movements. So you'll see a couple tweets that I just pulled up. There's stuff, people are, involved in thinking about how information is being presented to us, the viewer, the audience, the consumer, how it's being responded to in different ways, which I love that there are different perspectives, even in these 3 tweets. So if we talk about media literacy, this is a quote from Linda Ellerby, American journalist, pretty well known. And And she wrote about, or she talked about media literacy. It's not just important, it's absolutely critical. It's going to make a difference between whether kids are a tool of the mass media or whether they use mass media as a tool to use, right? So it's that question of agency, taking control as much as possible of the process that narratives are, of the narratives that are being presented to the viewer. So if we're actively participating, we're not passive spectators. And this potentially is dangerous. And I think we could probably have a long conversation about the dangers and the way, social media accounts are being shut down because, information is getting out there and different things are coming to light. So there is that sense of we are already aware and trying to push back against the dominant narrative that's being presented to us, whether it's in the news, whether it's in tabloids, whether it's in even film and television. Let's pause for a second here and take a step back. What is literacy? Think of what that means to you and type it in the chat, and I'll read a few of the answers as you type. What the heck is literacy? Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes. I thought you dropped from the call. You're back. I can hear you and see you.
How far back should I go? Did we take a second to think about literacy and put the responses? Where were we when I disappeared?
That was it. You put up what is literacy and asked for people to just take a moment and talk in the chat about what we see literacy as.
Great. So I'm going to open up the chat, and were there any answers? Let's take a look here. If we think about what is literacy, I do see some chat messages here. Aha, beautiful. Whoops. Can we also talk in the Q&A about Mercury in retrograde and how everything keeps freezing? Okay. So reading between the lines, wonderful. Subject based upon mastering the skills of reading, writing, comprehension, fluidity when reading, wonderful. Knowledge about different things, great. How well you can comprehend a story between the lines. Interpreting text for what it is in all forms of context, wonderful. Great answers, thank you. So if we're gonna look at literacy, we're also gotta look at culture, and media literacy and cultural studies and culture are very connected here. I'm focusing on a specific movement within cultural studies. There are a couple of different movements, but I'm looking at the cultural studies movement in Birmingham in the United Kingdom in the 50s and 60s. And so these are a couple of names that are pretty well known in this movement. Cultural studies is a field of cultural analysis that concentrates on the political dynamics of contemporary culture, as well as its historical foundations, as well as different habits, customs, traits. And they deal with ideology, class structure, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, and race, among others. Cultural studies sort of views things as fluid. So it's not just one way of looking at things, yeah? So there's a sort of multidisciplinarity, and we'll come back to that term in a minute. There's this multidisciplinarity that comes up within the movement of cultural studies or the school of cultural studies. And it was initially developed by British Marxist academics, late 1950s, 60s, 70s. So in the UK, there was a lot of stuff going on at that time, right? And it's subsequently been taken up and transformed by scholars from many disciplines throughout the world. And so this list that I'm offering you, I just want to point to, I will have a bibliography included at the end of this presentation. Some of you may be like, I don't really give a shit about this stuff, but if you are interested, take a look, learn, why not? Stuart Hall talks a lot about like the news and sort of ideologies of the police and race and that kind of stuff. He was from the UK, Jamaican by descent. Somebody like Dick Hebdige wrote about subcultures, and he wrote about in the 70s, the punk movement, and how the punk movement started out as people just finding stuff on the street and turning it into fashion. And then if you think of from the 70s, what that was, working class people and punk, to now when you look at, say, Madonna, who wears a punk outfit to the Met Gala, right? How things evolve in certain ways, especially as they relate to fashion, profit, capital, power, that kind of thing. So one thing I will add, that a key concern for cultural studies scholars is how these things connect to our everyday life. And so just to return to that question of many of us are fans of Britney Spears, of pop culture, of music, film, and television. Cultural studies looks at, how does that interest in our everyday life connect to these bigger questions of ideology and of, power dynamics and that kind of stuff. And I will add that I put this question in here, what is cultural studies? Because it has come up in a number of different conversations. What the heck is cultural studies? And so maybe that's also my motivation, that this is part of what cultural studies is. So really quickly, if we're looking at Stuart Hall in particular, because I'm going to talk about one way he looked at meaning and messages, which relates to the Free Britney movement and to news and media. So Jamaican-born cultural theorist who lived and worked in the UK. He was known as the godfather of multiculturalism. He was a professor. He wrote about race, gender, sexuality, and identity. A lot of stuff that he contributed to and helped motivate within thinking people, yeah? And so according to Stuart Hall, people interpret media texts in different ways, depending on their cultural background, their economic standing, and also, of course, our personal experiences. And I'll include in the bibliography, there's a woman by the name of Chimamanda Adichie, who writes about single stories and how we kind of can't rely on just one story to interpret or represent our identity. So we each are coming to the table with multiple different kinds of experiences and identities. Multiple stories make up this conversation, yeah, or our experience. And so Stuart Hall also was coming from that position. Stuart Hall also argued that audience members can play an active role in decoding, so unpacking, processing the messaging of the texts or the imagery or the messaging that is offered to us, yeah? So I won't get into the details of this. We can have a conversation about it a little bit later, but basically he considers meaning and message not as this one directional thing, yeah? Like a newscaster tells you something, you take it as gospel and you go about your day. He considers it as a circuit of culture, and also very important to our conversation, he considers it a way where the consumer or the audience is invested in and is as important to the production of meaning and messaging. And I'll explain. So there are a couple of different ways. This is in the late 70s, early 80s. He's talking about how, let's say a newscaster, Tom Brokaw, who we love and trust, tells you that this person is bad and you shouldn't follow this person, right? The dominant hegemonic position would be, oh, well, Tom Brokaw told me that this person is bad, so he's bad. Okay, got it, simple. This is people share the code, the messaging that's offered to us. One option would be also the negotiated position, right? So the negotiated position would be, okay, maybe I'll take part of what Tom Brokaw is telling me in a newscast, but maybe some of it I don't take. And I need to think for myself and figure out what I believe, what I don't believe, what I want to push back against. And then of course, there's the oppositional position, when people understand the text, but they reject the message. They're coming from an oppositional position. That's actually potentially a position of power. And think about this in regard to the Free Britney movement, the Britney Jean Spears case, and the messaging that's being given to us day after day in the media. Different news stories come up and they're presented as the truth, yeah? Are we taking everything as 100% real? Are we maybe negotiating with the messaging that's being offered to us? Are we opposing it and pushing back? Let's take a pause for a second here. Let's go back to the initial reflection. That thing that you thought of when I asked you to think about a moment where you said, wait, that's not true. Think about these positions that I just told you about. When you responded and said, wait, that's not true, were you negotiating? Were you in an oppositional position? If you want, put your response in the chat. Thoughts? I would argue that there's a lot of negotiated and oppositional thinking and acting within the Free Britney movement. I'll give you an example. This is one tweet that I had put out recently. You see these two headlines, pretty similar from two different outlets. After years of silence, Britney Spears will speak to the court on June 23rd. And I thought to myself, wait, that's not true. Is that true? And I started questioning, is it years of silence or being silenced, for example? And if any of you in the audience are not familiar with the Free Britney movement and the Britney Jean Spears case, she has been under a probate conservatorship since 2008. I'll give you an anecdote. I was talking to one of my cousins on video chat, and he's visiting my mom, and he's older, scholar type. And my mom is really excited that I'm doing this kind of work and engaged and enthusiastic about the Free Britney movement. So she's been like telling everyone she can tell. And my cousin was like, okay, but you need to go interview Britney Spears and get it on video and talk to her. And I was like, wait. You don't understand. That's the whole point, is that some of the messaging that's out in the mass, out to the masses, is obscuring the fact that she is under lock and key, so to speak, yeah? Jesse typed in the chat, the reflection for Jesse is whenever the media says negative about Britney to sway the mass, the general public. Yeah, fantastic. I'll give you a few more examples. I'll go through these a little bit quickly so we have time to talk at the end. And here's one where it's an article in which the author went through a title and the beginning of the text and rewrote it, yeah, did a little correction here. As a little bit of context, I'll tell you, there's a lot that happens both with the Britney case as well as other big issues going on in the world that flattens the power dynamic, yeah, that presents, for example, Britney Jean Spears and this entire army of lawyers and entertainment individuals and money managers, and makes them as if they have the same kind of power and are exerting it in the same way. This headline, I would say, tries to unpack that. So maybe conflict is actually struggle. Think about that. I'll keep moving so we can have some time. Another example, Jasmine brought this up with and shared this with me. So New Yorkers mark the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death with a long moment of silence and protest. And you see the image, this was the image on the right-hand side from the article. if you'd like, type some information in the chat. How do you respond to if we start to like unpack the details involved in this combination of the tagline, the title, the image, and then the text? I will say the one thing that really stands out to me is including one who was arrested for his part in a peaceful protest. Yeah, so that the fact that peaceful protest is included in there, what does that mean? It may mean a different thing to each of us, yeah? Couple of chats in here. State-sanctioned violence and performance by the state to absolve itself. Yep. Yep. Wonderful. And I just wanted to, also mention this is a very strange juxtaposition, perhaps, of COINTELPRO, and if we're talking about the 60s and so on, with J. Edgar Hoover, 50s, 60s, 70s, and ways that activism, civil rights activists and movements were sort of pushed off kilter. And there was a lot of money and as well as energy put into harassing, intimidating, taking the power away from collective movements that were trying to enact significant change, yeah? The comic that I included at the bottom is that, maybe this is the way it's structured, is to uphold power, is to try and keep, masses in disarray, seemingly. Text from Freedom Series, the FBI counterintelligence still goes on. They were surveying Baltimore heavily, yes, after the Freddie Gray protests. The name is different, but the tactics remain the same, exactly. Exactly. I'm going to give us 1 minute to look at this. So this is a video I found on the internet. And I'd just like you to take a look and listen to the copy, the words that are being presented by these TV hosts, yeah, these news hosts.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish the same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false news
has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what they say. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Oof. Does your head hurt? My head hurts after all of that. So I wanted to include this because nothing against any of the individuals working in news and entertainment news, because anecdotally, I'll also mention, and Badir and I talked about this a while back, I did TV hosting classes and I wanted to be in that world for a long time. But then I started to realize, like, what am I being asked to share and then, of course, uphold, right? By the same copy is just being offered. How many different newscasters did you see there? Yeah, 1984 vibes. Yes, thank you. I appreciate all of that. I hope I didn't freak anybody out with that video. But in response to this, I'm not saying don't watch the news, right? But what I'm saying is there are different ways to respond to this. And of course, when I say that, I'm thinking of the Free Britney movement. There are different ways to respond to the information that is being presented to us. And I would suggest that that's a good thing. Multidisciplinarity, which I mentioned earlier on, it's a great thing. We have so many different individuals from different backgrounds. Sometimes we have really generative arguments. Sometimes it just devolves into chaos. My hope is that it stays above chaos and we can disagree and come from different perspectives. I will also offer in preparation for this presentation, there were different positions regarding, for example, Brittany's Instagram and the captions, yeah? Maybe some of us think that the captions are written by Brittany. Some of us think that it's sort of a mishmash. Some of it is hers, some of it isn't. Maybe others think the whole thing is a simulation and it's all fake, right? That's actually a powerful position to be in as a collective, as a movement, yeah? That's what I'm offering to you. And related to that, this is something that I had thought about a couple of years ago before I was involved in all of this. And I'm really excited that people disagree with me on this because that's generative. Let me say that again. So from my perspective, if you put aside real and fake, what's true, what's not true, and then just start from the premise that it's all fake, all constructed, then maybe we can start to see how it's performed and the narratives that are taking place. And just like with those newscasters, what's the thing that's being offered to us and do we agree with it, right? A few more examples. Do we know? Timbaland said Britney Spears dissed him and Justin Timberlake. This also came up in preparation for this presentation. It was confirmed that this thing happened, right? Britney Spears dissed him and Justin Timberlake. But the thing I would point you to, and I'm grateful to the folks at Freedom Series for pointing this out, is, okay, but why is this the headline and why is this the story being presented to us, yeah? Thinking of the bigger narrative. Most of us in this room understand some of the narrative regarding and surrounding Britney Spears and why this would be part of that narrative, yeah? Another story here is recent from TMZ, Britney Spears. She won't ask the judge to end her conservatorship, but she's done with her dad. I'm going to go through these quickly. The rest of the story, I just took screenshots from the rest of the story. So think of and look at the juxtaposition of the words and the imagery here. So we have Britney with Sam, they're walking on a beach. And then it's telling this story. Sources with direct knowledge tell TMZ Britney does not feel trapped in the 13-year conservatorship. She has 99% of the freedom she'd had if she wasn't in a conservatorship. One of you had included in the chat, read between the lines, yeah? Engage in a negotiated position or even an oppositional position to really start to think about what's going on here. Not just to Britney and in Britney's world, but what's going on with us as consumers and the audience and also participants in culture. If you scroll down TMZ, this is the next set of images and words that come up. Why this screenshot? What does it evoke to a different person, yeah? I'll go back here. The text in the chat. Yes, she has two men holding her down, yeah? Sam's got her hand. Then you come here. This is a reference to some of the videos that she makes on her, or some of the videos that appear on her Instagram account, yeah? We're also told, TMZ, speaking from this supposed position of authority, we're also told Britney is aware her life was out of control before the conservatorship. So start to unpack, is this telling us, is this giving us sort of a message that they're pro-conservatorship, they're in favor of keeping it in a certain way? For some of us, this is already old hat. We know that this is maybe what's being offered as a message. Later on in the article, what does this photograph evoke? How do we receive it? We'll come back to this article when we have a little bit of time to talk at the end. I will say this, that the end of this article, it's cut off at the bottom, but the last line of this article says, it's likely the hearing next month will be open to the public. It should be riveting. Why is that included? Yeah. Yes, Free Britney Norway, that photo scares you. Yeah, me too. So we're reading between the lines, we're confronting the way items are being presented to us, as well as the ideologies and the messages that are being offered to us. Media literacy. I will say one tiny thing at the end here. I would suggest, this is a little bit of a turning in one direction, maybe a little less of idolizing celebrities would help promote and propel the media literacy that we're engaged in, because the Free Britney movement is deeply engaged and it's very motivating to me. We can talk about this last tweet a little afterwards when we get into chat. I know it's a little left field, but I would suggest that pushing back both with media literacy, really unpacking how things are being presented, goes hand in hand with considering Britney Jean Spears as a human being and not as a celebrity, and really taking time to move away from the dehumanizing. This is a word that came up in preparation for this presentation. There are so many things that are taking place that aim to dehumanize her. And of course, in some ways, dehumanizing the individuals involved in this movement and the individuals involved in receiving messages in general. So any audience, right? Maybe one tactic would be to stop idolizing and thinking of Britney as an individual whose rights were completely trampled on and removed in this fraudulent conservatorship, yeah? The celebrity stuff I know is tough because we want to enjoy celebrities. Yeah, we want to just, they're so incredible. So maybe that'll be another conversation we'll have a little bit later. But I wanted to add it so we think about it. A couple of texts going on here. The conservatorship enables Jamie's position in her life to be abusive in the ways he has. And that's documented. We have, actual court documents and things that are taking place. Yep, distance from celebrity culture. Yep, that would be a whole series that we could do, is talking about celebrity culture. Lisa, thank you. Lisa's regret is knowing who was involved. Lisa could have investigated sooner, but was unaware how bad it really was. I would say, I think most people would share that position. And I see us reaching so many people. I mean, my mom aside, or like my weirdo cousin who's like, go interview her. Like, it's so easy. But every day, more and more people are becoming more aware. And that is a constant that comes up where it's like, I had no idea. It's something to keep in mind as part of our mission moving forward. I'll end here. We have about 15 minutes. If you want to reach out, you can contact Freedom Series, and we're in communication. I will make this PowerPoint and the related short bibliography available if you'd like to think about it and have reference to the stuff that I've looked at. And I'll stop share. If we want to have a little conversation, let's have at it. Thank you so much for listening and watching and thinking.
I did change the settings so everyone should be allowed to unmute themselves as you see fit. If you are trying to and unable to, just let me know, because as long as we've been relying on Zoom during this pandemic, it's still some kinks here and there. So if anyone would like to unmute, you should be fine.
I just want to underscore like the fact that there's a multidisciplinarity element to this movement, that like we have attorneys, we invested in this, we have people like myself who are looking at the media side of things, and we have people on the ground who have engaged in activism in a number of different ways. I think it's sort of come up in conversation a little bit lately that there's this trepidation or exhaustion, or like, this movement is like overwhelming. I feel that too. So part of why I'm telling you this now is like, maybe we breathe in a new air and breath of fresh air and like get motivated again. And from my perspective, that motivation comes from there's so many different perspectives coming into this, and that's powerful. That's all. I'll stop talking. I've talked too much. You guys talk amongst yourselves.
First of all, thank you, Tamar, for putting this together and leading us through this journey to understand exactly what it is that we're dealing with. It's easy to, as we've had internal conversations, it's easy to feel that other people will understand it. As you know, I studied basically cultural analysis and social analysis in college. So I have been kind of conditioned and educated to kind of approach things in this way. And despite how much we all try in our different kind of areas of expertise, it's so easy to forget that weren't always in this position of being able to analyze things and to really kind of break it down in a way for us to be able to think better and kind of contextualize the world that we live in, whether it's in Free Britney or beyond, or whatever the case may be. Even something as simple as, a few weeks ago, there was a whole highlight after you know what, his name isn't even relevant, but the cop who killed George Floyd, after he was found guilty, there was a whole thing on ABC News about, thank you, Derek Chauvin. There was a whole thing on ABC News about some cops local to me that were getting praised for responding to a burglary call from a dollar store and instead buying the socks for this homeless gentleman. Like it was just propaganda, so to speak. And so, even something as simple as that to understand, okay, like what is the point here? There are everyday people that do these sorts of things. This is not, kind of absolve anyone of anything. And especially now, and I don't want to kind of go on too long either, as you guys know, that can happen with me. But on Twitter, I've seen a lot of behavior within the Free Britney movement where folks will kind of bash an article, a news piece, anything, and along with that, retweet the link to wherever it is that this information or misinformation, in this case, it's usually misinformation or fabrication, where this is coming from, not understanding that, at this point in time, companies know that speaking on or having content related to Britney Spears is a money grab. There is no morals or ethics attached to it. They know that she has that buying power. And that's why you see Entertainment Tonight saying, oh, well, look at us when we were with Britney in 1999. We've seen that footage. We don't care to see that, and in all of these different people taking the opportunity, it's not that everyone's saying, oh, look, the Free Britney movement. And I've seen a lot of that kind of thought pattern on Twitter and in social media. And it's like, no, literally, for these companies, they're just looking at their bottom line. They have plenty of content in the vault. They have so many different things that they can do, whether it's Baby One More Time in this new Salma Hayek movie, or any number of things, this new t-shirt at Hot Topic or Urban Outfitters. Like, no, this is all about the bottom line and how people can monetize Britney, knowing that anything with her name on it at this moment in time, due to the Free Britney movement, will be a moneymaker. And so I feel that in sharing these false narratives or kind of these questionable media and news sources, telling everyone to look at how false it is, that doesn't really matter. I mean, you can always respond to the outlet, whoever it is that's running the account. Usually, obviously, it won't get to the top folks, but there's people taking an eye on how their things are being received. And so there's hits, there's traffic, people track the traffic, which is why we see these sort of like these clickbait lines and kind of, oh, well, I saw, Lisa, you responded to, I guess last week, it was one of the articles saying, oh, the Free Britney movement explained. And it's like, no, you really have no authority. Like, what? This is not accurate. And so just for us to all be aware that even though this is due to her being a global pop star and we're all at different places in the world, and this kind of necessitates this movement being and online activism, not to mention that conservatorship and guardianship abuse is a worldwide issue in and of itself. For those who don't have fans and activists to galvanize their support so readily, and not even so readily, it's been 13 years, but you know, just for us to all kind of take a step back and think about that, and to think about the different forces at play, to think about the fact that this ring of people, you know, criminals allegedly, you know, whatever you want to call them, um, likely extends far beyond what we can imagine. Usually the names that we know are not the most powerful. Those are the ones that are expendable. There's always kind of big money makers sitting behind. So I'm sure this extends far beyond what we can imagine. But in thinking that way, we also must stay conscious and aware and alert of the fact that they will try to suppress, quell, and create all sorts of confusion amongst the movement itself. It's not something that's unusual or specific to the Free Britney movement at all. It's typical, large, small scale, in and out of the United States. So, along with the media and the powerful interests at play, you know, let us just remember that no individual is bigger than the system. This is the system that is enabling, and every kind of part that is plugged in can just be pulled out, just like the United States can take out one president and put in another, and you still see the same rhetoric to uphold this ideal. So I'll just kind of end it there. And again, please, I know I see some folks that have joined us before. Thank you. Feel free to speak up. You guys are all unable to unmute, so feel free.
I mean, I'll add one thing just from one of the sort of related context is you know, some of the conversations I've had and things I've seen on social media where people will confront others who consider themselves anti-capitalist, and they're like, but you live in a capitalist society, so how can you be anti-capitalist? And it's like, that's part of the point, is to be aware and to be increasingly like in the process of practicing anti-capitalism doesn't negate the entire system that's at play, but knowing it more and more, I see it changing the shape of culture and society. And I'm sure many of you will agree, even though many of you also might be so exhausted by it that it's like, oh, when is it ever going to change, right? But that awareness is key. Yes, Badir, to be aware and to continuously resist and redefine in the chat. Thank you. Comments, anyone? Thoughts, responses? Okay. Lisa.
Is my microphone working?
Yes. Hey, Jesse.
Cool. Hi, people. I don't know. I guess I was just going to talk because when no one else talks, then I'm just like, okay. There's just so much like going through my head and so many things that popped up that you spoke about like throughout that I wanted to say something, but I can't freaking type because I keep knocking my phone over. But personally, like I definitely can tell, like I'm exhausted, and I know a lot of people are when there's just so much, what's the word? Like not dissension, but there's just so much where there are all these little like fires that people are starting all the time. And then like in the Free Britney movement, for example, and then like I'll get on my phone to like do one thing, and then I just end up being like, oh my God, what just happened? You know? And like, sometimes I just have to take a step back from that and be like, okay, well, I know that like, I know what I believe in, like what my goal is that like, she should be free. So like all of this like confusion shouldn't really matter. But like someone else said, like people, I feel like if you've made it to this conversation, like you're probably fairly media literate, but it's still so confusing for all of us. And so I think for us, we're kind of trying to like disseminate that like alternative information, or to inspire other people to, you know, just ask more questions and then come back with more answers for everyone. But it's just so hard sometimes, I feel like, when it's like, I don't want to confuse people by what I'm saying because I've already spent time working on this, you know, but if people haven't, it's so much more confusing. And so I guess for me, like personally, my account and like my website is about like breaking down history and like questioning history. And so like I want to talk or write about one thing and then I just kind of get completely blocked because I'm like, I need to break down so much just to get to that like base thing that people need to know to like make logic out of all this. And it's just everything that the people are doing that want to spread misinformation is totally working.
Yeah, it's I think there was an interaction a week ago or 2 weeks ago. Lisa, I'm going to mention a phrase that you used was about staying in your lane. And I take that as a really great way to think about it, although it can be received in different ways in different contexts. For me, it's like, I'm so new to this specific movement that like, I can't do certain things that someone else does, right? And what you just mentioned, like the historical examination and analysis, like I would do a disservice to the movement if I tried to do it that way, you know what I mean? And at the same time, I can learn from you and maybe you can learn from me. So for me, staying in my lane is, okay, media, like my whole life has been in some regard connected to how I understand and increasingly understand media. And I think, again, part of my motivation was for each of us to start thinking about, okay, what's in my wheelhouse and how can I use it? And then how can I learn from someone else's wheelhouse, right? Because we're not singular beings, right? We don't have single stories. And so maybe part of my motivation is to like get that exchange going again, regardless of the provocations that may come up. You know, maybe we can use the fact that we've got a great power here coming from different perspectives. And if we focus on that power and that agency that comes from it, while simultaneously trying to be more Teflon against the stuff that's really damaging, let it slide away. Maybe we can do a little bit and, you know, enact a little bit of difference or change. I hope it's possible. I think it's possible. It's already, I mean, if you see in the media, like some of the, I think LA Times, who was it? Was it Iconic Britney or somebody had retweeted a cover from LA Times that used Britney's Instagram instead of Britney Says, you know what I mean? Like there are these tiny things that actually mean so much that reveal the shift. And in other situations, political movements and that kind of stuff, it's also taking place. There is so much power in what we are doing if we calm the fuck down a little sometimes and focus. And then get really fucking mad and then focus. Excuse my language, sorry. And support each other, you know, like it's tough. It can be exhausting. And there's a term, I think in psychology speak, like hypervigilance, where you're just constantly unpacking everything. That's so exhausting to be always unpacking and reading through the line, reading between the lines. So if someone needs to take of course, we all need to take a break to recharge and then come back to it. Maybe, yeah.
I agree with what Sandra said, that the Freedom Series is a great place where we could all come together as a collective and speak on a one-on-one basis with one another and speak how we feel. And we could all agree to disagree on certain things, but we gotta stay focused and remember, why are we here? What are we fighting for? And we can't let ourselves get swayed by the negative media narratives or things that are happening on the sidelines, because that is a distraction and we have to focus on the bigger picture, why we're here, and all of us coming together as one for the same goal and realizing that each one of us have the power to use our voice for the greater good. And I thank people like Lisa and Tamara and the people at the Freedom Series and every person here in the movement, because I know that we're here for the right reasons, and we will rise above all the negative and all that stuff that comes our way. And like Tamara was touching on, we shouldn't idolize these celebrities, because at the end of the day, they're human just like us. They're human, and they, especially Britney, deserves to have her rights to freedom and live her life the way she chooses. So I don't believe this 99.9%, oh, I'm flying to Hawaii one day, but then the next day is like a media op to make it seem like she's free when she's not. So yeah. And again, I want to thank Lisa, because she's a grateful, we're grateful to have her as an ally in the movement, because she's been in this for so long, and she knows her business. Like, she's very like appreciated by us, and I want to thank you, Lisa.
Oh, you're muted.
I want to say thank you, but never forget, I needed you. I needed you more. And I do appreciate you so much. And you know I would do anything for you guys. You're great. You nailed it. You nailed it. So we've got more work to do, but we're getting there.
Yep.
I love you too. Can I be your Aunt Lisa? Just send me a postcard. It's all good.
Yes.
You're succeeding in a big way too. Believe you me. And more is coming. And June 23rd, please, let's have a big party in Grand Park. And I mean it. All she has to say, please just ask for a real lawyer.
Right.
All right, please, please, please. And then we just get to watch the fur fly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any final thoughts? We're just past the hour mark. All right. Again, thank you so much, everyone. Jasmine, do you want to close us out? Freedom Series, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Let me pop in real quick. Thank you guys for coming. As always, I appreciate it. This space is great. It's rejuvenating. I'm glad that we're all able to kind of come in and talk and listen and share and, maintain a troll-free space, which has been marvelous.
Yes.
And stay tuned. We've all, had a bit of exhaustion and just like obviously life is going on, but we are all still here and still brainstorming and working. We hope to kind of have a few more events coming up soon. Nothing prior to the June 23rd court hearing. We may do an after event, not on the same day, but who knows? There's so much up in the air with that. But looking forward to doing one also on movement co-opting and activism. We still have
disability rights.
Yeah, we still have the disability rights that we've been trying to do, but we got to step that one up. And who knows what else. So if anyone has any ideas or things that they want to hear about or any thoughts, you can reach us by email, on Twitter, on Instagram. And we have, some videos on YouTube. So hopefully we'll get some snippets from this event as well, posted on YouTube. So share it within your networks, not just within Free Britney. If there's anyone who that may be interested in this type of information, I did post this on my Facebook as well. So just keep getting the word out and bringing different perspectives in, because we're not just a bunch of fans. I actually find that to be insulting. So, we're so much more than that. And from so many walks of life. So we're powerful, and thank you all for what you do. and for taking the time out of your Thursday or wherever. I don't know. I guess everyone out of your day. So thank you, everyone.